If you know anything about video games, you likely might have heard of Chrono Trigger, an SNES game from 1995 that made quite the lasting impact on the games industry. Considering the sea of Chrono Trigger media on YouTube alone, let alone the whole media sphere, I'll cut right to the chase in my video, while still providing essentials, but it's pretty likely you already know about Chrono Trigger and its lasting impacts, at least a little bit. Featuring artwork and visual designs by Akira Toriyama, who had already been heavily involved with the incredibly popular Dragon Quest games, Chrono Trigger was seemingly always set to succeed. The game features a beautiful sense of structure, understanding how to set the stage for an epic story, filled with challenges and set pieces throughout. While not going too much in depth on story, you play as Chrono, the red-haired main character of the game. Accompanying you are a collection of memorable characters, like the reliable tank Robo and the incredibly intelligent Luca. Like many other RPGs, you go across a series of overworlds and levels, fighting monsters in turn-based battles, gaining experience points, leveling up, and eventually completing the story. And what a humongous story it is, full of time travel and various other kinds of themes involving feudalism and warfare. While it's safe to say that RPGs by this point were no strangers to long fantasy narratives, Chrono Trigger, despite being surrounded by amazing contemporaries, still managed to stand out. Before Chrono Trigger was the Final Fantasy games, and the aforementioned Dragon Quest series. Even more so, there's Breath of Fire, Live a Live, and many other SNES JRPGs with similar design formulas. With Final Fantasy IV, or 2 as it was initially called in the West, the RPG franchise experienced one of its most enriched stories and casts of characters, as well as many necessary updates to the overall function of the RPG. Following that, another titan of RPG development, Dragon Quest V, also made waves, with games like Phantasy Star 4 making names for themselves elsewhere. And of course, Final Fantasy VI, or 3, still many's favorite of the entire Final Fantasy franchise, even further refined gameplay mechanics and provided a truly layered and dynamic quest. So, all that considered, what could possibly make Chrono Trigger still stand out, and manage to affect the overall standards of RPG gaming? After all, so many genre milestones had just been released, let alone almost all on the same console. Well, to put it bluntly, Chrono Trigger sells itself in its atmosphere and quickly recognizes how quickly engrossing it can become. The movement and overall size of sprites on screen has a really refined, yet unique presence. Walking and running around as Chrono just feels right. The sprites in the game have a late in the SNES lifespan level of polish, with highly detailed environments that still render out solid shapes and designs. And there really is no way around talking about the game's music. Of course, one could say that the benchmarks of quality and interweaving of music and gameplay in the JRPG genre had already been firmly established and re-established by Final Fantasy, Phantasy Star, Shining Force. But seriously, Chrono Trigger's music did leave an incredible lasting impression, to lengths that future Chrono series games never quite achieved. In many ways, the battle system of Chrono Trigger really resembles what many top-down Western RPGs and action RPGs eventually become, with characters not really changing in between battle and overworld. Not only that, but it's also the same structure of many future RPGs where character placement and movement timing in fights can greatly affect the outcome of the turn-based encounter. Truly, in many ways, this SNES classic still has elements that set it, in some cases, far above its predecessors. Of course, it's not necessarily a perfect game either, with plenty of points to get lost in the overworld without proper directions given at times. However, for the most part, the plot is clearly delivered to the player, and things really do continue to feel satisfying and exciting as events progress. The inclusion of more combat elements throughout the playtime, like magic, makes it not just a fun game to strategize combos with, but also an evolving experience. It's kinda weird because one could say, in theory, Chrono Trigger isn't all that revelatory a game. Especially in comparison to the many other great 16-bit RPGs of the era, could it still stand out among the pack? Perhaps no. It's not necessarily a revolution for the genre, but what it refines for the genre, it sets a whole new standard. Not only this, but it still retains its own unique identity. The menu cards, the sound effects, once you go Chrono Trigger, it's hard for it not to leave a lasting impression. In so many ways, it raised a bar that many still have it at the top of. Chrono Trigger still tops many best SNES games lists, as well as best overall games lists. It is beloved for a very clear reason. Seeing through a playthrough of Chrono Trigger to the very end cannot be recommended enough.